there will be people who go online and buy a car, and there'll be people who only ever come to a dealership. But I think people will go in and out of the mediums, and I think, the customer experience has to evolve to take it. But I've actually been surprised by how many people, despite the current situation, still want to come into a dealership and see face-to-face. Yeah. Much more than I expected. So I think that side of it will continue to evolve, and it will become part of the process, probably more so than becoming the whole process in majority of the cases.
Hi, and welcome back to the Armchair Show, where today I am joined by Sally Fyffe. Once again, a return visit.
Thank you.
You must have enjoyed it last time, Sally, that you come back on. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. And yeah, very different. I think in some ways Zoom's a lot more comfortable. Earphones and things are a new accessory.
Yeah, a little bit different.
But nice to be back and to have a chance to chat again.
Excellent. I believe you're in between roles at the moment as well, so it's quite an exciting time for you at the moment, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I've done lots of different things in my time and had sort of great time during lockdown running a dealership and stuff. But yeah, moving on to something new in the next couple of weeks. So very exciting.
Very exciting time ahead. And it has been a very interesting start to the year, as we all know. We won't go too much into that, to be honest. But I think just thinking about the industry in general, like you say, you spent a lot of time in different roles. I think 20 years in OEM, haven't you? You ended up on the board at PSA. So you've seen a lot of stuff happen. How has the industry changed, do you think, the most over the last 5 or 6 years?
I actually think the industry still is very traditional in its approach. I think things around it potentially have changed more than the automotive itself. And I think actually the last 6 months, the COVID has probably started to create change that's been needed. Okay. I think everyone's been talking about autonomous cars and, cars that drive electrification. And there's been a lot of buzzword around the fact that the industry is changing. But from what I've seen, actually very little change has occurred.
That's interesting.
And I think, the current situation has actually necessitated that change, looking at all of the processes, looking at the way we interact, looking at how we deal online versus face-to-face. So I think it's a good thing.
Do you think customers have changed over that period, or is it just a natural evolution of the industry?
I'm not sure. If you look back over the last 5 years, customers have changed that much. There's a lot of talk that people are going to stop buying cars and they're going to start to, share cars much more, and the way in which they use mobility and lots of big projects across the industry as to how that's going to look. But in reality, people are still going out buying cars, putting them on PCP maybe rather than paying cash, but still using them in the same way. So I think customers, obviously, as you start to bring millennials through, people with a different mindset, becoming maybe more online, maybe using things like CarWow have taken off, and other sort of providers where you can price quote, which maybe wasn't there 5 or 10 years ago. But I think people just did it differently. They went to several dealerships and asked the price and did the same thing. They just didn't use the internet for it.
If we sort of rewind a little bit, we talk a little bit about your journey into the industry, Sally. Where did it all start for you?
It all started actually in advertising. So I worked for an agency in London, and I moved across to a new one, and Toyota was my client. So I was very much on the marketing side, looking at CRM and way in which we customer dialogue, etc. And then I had the opportunity to actually go and work for Toyota. So I switched over. I think the fact that Toyota was based 3 miles from where I live and I was commuting to London might have had something to do with it. But that was really how I came into it, so very much through the marketing side. And just sort of once you're in, I think it's one of those industries that hooks you. And you get to know people and you get to understand how it works, and I've stayed in it ever since. Yeah,
I think most guests we have on have similar stories where either it's just a happy accident or it wasn't what they planned, but just the natural route of their career kind of ended up in automotive. What do you love most about the industry?
I like the fact that there's so many different facets of it. You've got the production element of it, which feeds in through the manufacturers. You've got the network. It's a slightly odd relationship where there's a franchise agreement. So you're as a dealer, you have to have certain standards. You have to portray yourself as Audi or Ford or whoever it is in a way that the manufacturer is happy with. But in majority of cases, they're then owned by independent people. So that sort of dynamic between the two, I think, is a really interesting way in which it works. And then you've got the sales side, and then you've got the service. So again, you've got two different dynamics working. You've got two teams working within a business to hopefully the best solution, but with very different priorities. So I just find it an interesting business with the different facets all coming together.
Definitely. And do you think it's doing enough, the industry as a whole, that is, doing enough to attract new talent?
I think it's a difficult thing. I mean, one of the things that everyone prides themselves around in automotive is that, people come in and they work their way up and you get all these opportunities. And that's great, but I actually think it's an industry that probably could do with more new talent at all levels. That quite often we don't get that different opinion coming in or that different set of experience which would bring, a different viewpoint to the table.
Yeah.
So I think probably could be doing more to attract talent. It does feel quite a closed world,
Yeah.
but that might be when you're in it. I'm not sure how it would look to somebody who's outside.
Externally, perhaps, yeah.
Yeah.
Have you got any ideas of what dealerships could do, for example, to bring more talent in? Or is it anything they're not doing, do you think, perhaps? I know it's difficult, like you say, because you're in it. You kind of
It is.
very kind of ensconced in it. But
I think dealerships probably are doing better at bringing new talent in, maybe even more than the manufacturer side or some of the suppliers.
Okay.
Certainly, if you go back a few years, if you were recruiting a service advisor or a salesman, you had to have people with experience.
Yeah.
I think the dynamic of not needing to be technical, not needing to necessarily know the product from a technical point of view inside out and back to front, and this shift towards actually the customer experience and actually the need to get to understand customers, to interact with them, has really helped to bring new people in.
Yeah.
And quite often you hear stories now where people go and hand business cards out to somebody in a restaurant who gives great service, because the priority of what's important has changed. You can teach people the technical side. You can't teach them a mindset and a way to operate.
No, you can't, can you? I mean, and that actually, you've got a master's in coaching, haven't you? Is that correct?
I have, yeah.
How has that benefited your career in what you've done so far?
It's taught me an awful lot about humans, dynamics. If I'm honest, probably the most it taught me a lot about myself.
Okay.
I think when you do something like that, you have to do a lot of introspective thinking. You have to do some very scary assignments where you go and write down sort of your innermost thoughts and actually put them to paper. But certainly in my career, I don't think I'd ever taken that step back and thought about how I interact with people, what my leadership skills are and that side of it. So I think both the way in which I would now work with a team is different to what it would have been 5 or 6 years ago. But I think also my self-awareness and thinking about how I come across to people has probably benefited as well.
That's fascinating. And going back to the team element of that, how differently do you work with them now? What's the key sort of differences in the way that you approach teamwork and managing a team?
I think now my view about a team is always to make them the best they can be. I think... And maybe that's changed as I've got older as well. Certainly if I go back 10 years in the culture in which the industry was then, you had to be the person who knew it all. You had to be the person who had the opinion, and you had to have that profile.
Yeah.
I don't feel the same way now. I feel more my role is to actually support people, and I use my coaching a lot when I'm working with a team to help them come up with their own suggestions rather than being the person who sits there and go, right, this is what you must do.
Yeah, making them more autonomous.
Absolutely, but also I find you get a lot more engagement that way.
Okay.
I think if you tell somebody, you must go and sell this way, they're going, yeah, whatever. and they'll take it away and they'll give it a go for a bit because they're trying to make you happy or whatever.
Yeah.
But if you can actually engage them in developing that process so they feel part of it, then the ownership they take away, the dedication they give to it, and the focus is much, much better as well.
Yeah, and it's a very challenging customer base that they're working with these days, and we've spoken a lot about this on the show, partly because it's such a dynamic sales journey they take, or buyer journey rather. Quite often these days you'll have a car buyer walking into the showroom who thinks, perhaps they may do, but thinks they know more than the salesperson about the car because they've spent the last 3 months looking at reviews and watching YouTube videos about it. From your experience, how can salespeople deal with that kind of dynamic sales scenario, if you like?
I think training is important. I think giving the sales guys the opportunity to learn the detail, to watch videos and to understand the product as best you can.
Yeah.
But I think also it's about taking the time to sit and listen to the customer.
Yep.
Actually see what it is they're interested in, accept the fact that they may not be the guru who has to make it up if they don't know,
Yep.
but actually they can have a dialogue with the customer, get into a conversation, and if necessary they can go and ask the question or look it up.
Yeah.
That actually knowing everything in detail on a product point of view isn't necessarily what the customer's looking for, as long as they're confident that they understand the product, that that they're giving the right information across. It's more about actually understanding whether that matches the needs and talking to them about their individual concerns.
Yeah, and it's okay sometimes to note out that the customer is wrong. The customers aren't always completely on the ball with everything, but it's how you deliver that news, isn't it? That they've spent again 3 months researching something and come up with the wrong opinion on something. again, think about your own experience and like perhaps the people that you've worked with or the bosses you've had. Can you think of, without naming names, can you think of someone who inspired you as a leader and the reasons why they inspired you?
Absolutely. I've been lucky to work with some great people, actually, over the years. Both people that I've reported into and other people within the industry who have become colleagues or whatever.
Yep.
I think the people who inspire me the most are those that actually really develop relationships and show how... Because to me, that's really important. It's about how you interact with people and how you develop sort of mutual gain out of something.
Yep.
So those that I found most inspiring have been either the very good people managers or the people who have realised that actually getting to the right or the best solution for everyone is about sort of working as a team.
Yep.
And that can be a team of peers as much as a team that you're managing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, that would be inspirational to me.
And the other side of that, again, definitely mentioning no names. You knew this was coming. Have you got a boss in your mind who perhaps wasn't as good as they could have been? And the reasons for
Yes, absolutely. I think everyone has
we all
that.
have, haven't we? Surely.
Yeah.
Although we have had one or two people say, in fact, one person said that their best boss was also their worst boss because the things they did taught them how to be a better boss themselves. What's been your experience with that?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think if we hadn't had the negative experiences to learn from, then you go through life thinking everything was hunky-dory and swimming and it would be really unreal. Yeah, I remember a boss I had very early on who was an absolute job's worth. He used to micromanage me to the point where I didn't have an opinion on anything. And things like I had to sit in the office until he'd finished just so that I could put something in an envelope and send it in the post, despite the fact that I'd had no work to do for 2 hours because that made him feel important. So yeah, I think everybody can bring most of that to the table.
You learn from their mistakes, don't you? I think.
You do.
And they always stick them. I've had bad bosses myself. I'm waiting for someone to ask me that question themselves. Actually, I'll do it one day on one show. Looking ahead. I mean, you've got a very exciting time ahead, as you say, a new journey, new experiences that on the horizon. Where do you think the industry is going? If this is an odd time to ask this question because if we'd asked this question last year about 12 months ahead, we'd never have guessed where we are now. But equally, that's going to influence the next 10 years probably. So what do you see the future dealership looking like? So if we go forward to 2030, for example, will it look significantly different, do you think? Or are we going through a period now where there's just a lot of change that's going to come and go? Or is it going to sustain and change it comprehensively?
I think it's going to evolve, and it's interesting because if you had asked me the question sort of 12 months ago, I would have said much more about online, much more about people interacting in different ways. So I don't think there will be people who go online and buy a car, and there'll be people who only ever come to a dealership, but I think people will go in and out of the mediums, and I think the customer experience has to evolve to take it. But I've actually been surprised by how many people, despite the current situation, still want to come into a dealership and see face-to-face. Yeah. Much more than I expected. So I think that side of it will continue to evolve and it will become part of the process, probably more so than becoming the whole process in majority of the cases. Okay. But I think electric and environmental is going to have a big impact. I think, moving towards the electrification, the different types of reducing CO2 emissions, I think that's going to have a much bigger impact over the next sort of 2 or 3 years as people change. And interestingly, I think the whole move to mobility, which was the huge focus a year ago, probably isn't there now.
What do you think that is?
There aren't many people who want to get in and share a car right now. This concept of having a car outside your house, you can go and pick up and drive to the supermarket or take for a weekend, park it, leave the keys again, absolutely great. Yeah. All of a sudden, has it been properly disinfected? Is it clean? I'm not sure people will have that mindset. I think public transport will be reduced greatly. Yeah. And I think we've seen it in recent months over the spike in used car sales as well. I think a lot more people like that security of their own little safe environment to move around in. Yeah. So I think that could have quite a negative effect on the growth of that for many years to come now. Yeah,
I hadn't thought about that at all. I mean, I've never really liked the idea of car sharing anyway, because I like my own space in the car anyway, just to get my head in gear and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I suppose that's going to be a classic one. And like you say, the electric vehicle side of things, that's clearly going to have a big impact, isn't it?
I think so. And that's going to be an interesting one as the technology starts to develop more further as well, and the knowledge of the sales guys, etc. But I think people still like going to dealerships. I think people like that interaction. I think one thing, and everybody takes different things out of the COVID experience, but I think it's made me realise how important it is having relationships with people and having that face-to-face type environment.
Yeah.
And I think people will like that in the dealership, whether it's getting it serviced and having that ability to ask the technical question, to go and see the technician, etc., or whether it's in a sales point of view to actually sit and really look around the product or drive it, etc. I think it's become more important to us maybe than it was, despite the difficulties with it, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I think we've, like you say, we've been forced into this online-only world, haven't we, for 6 months or however long it's been. And at first, it might have been a bit novel for people, and it's a new challenge. But I think ultimately, you just miss human contact, don't you? I think that's probably what's bringing people still into dealerships. Which, again, for listeners and people watching this show, that's great news, isn't it? Despite that, do you think the whole, the idea of selling a car over Zoom or doing, I know you can't do remote test drives, but doing everything more remotely, do you think that's going to stay, or are we kind of experiencing that in 2020 and then it's just going to kind of filter away and we'll get back to normal from next year onwards? What do you think?
I think it'll stay within reason. I think what it will do is provide another channel for customers to choose from.
Yeah.
There are people who don't feel comfortable going out, maybe shielding or whatever. There may be people that don't want to go to a busy environment or whatever, and for them it could be perfect.
Yeah.
I think what it's done is it's brought video and Zoom into being a part of the choice, and I think people might have an initial conversation and then come in, or again it's about giving customers different channels they can choose to interact with at different times, rather than it has to be this or it has to be that.
That's quite exciting though, isn't it? I think it's a new challenge for dealerships and people in that industry. We could talk all day, Sally, as you know, and we'll definitely have you back on. But I'm just interested to hear your experiences of being on the show, because obviously your second time, and as we always say, it's not the usual thing, that it's not your day job, Have you found the experience of being on a show like this?
Twofold. I think sitting here face to face with you, with the cameras and the earphones, is a
stuff.
lot more daunting than being on Zoom, or it is in my view.
Hopefully not me.
Not personally, of course. But I think, the opportunity to be here in the studio and meet other people and socialise, etc., then that's really valuable, which you don't get when you just join a call and you say a polite hello to each other and a polite goodbye at the end. You miss that side of it. So, no, it's been a great experience, and thank you for inviting me back.
No problem at all. It's great to have knowledge sharing. I think just one very last question. Is there anyone that you follow in the industry, or anyone outside of the industry that you follow that really inspires you, that you could recommend that people either read, if it's a book, or people that you follow on social media?
I'm not a huge social media person, actually. I mean, I do a lot of reading, which stems from when I did my masters and things. Yep. And people like Kotler, in terms of his view of leadership, and certainly some of his books are very approachable, and actually, rather than tell you what you need to do, they make you think through stories and things. Yeah. So personally, I get a lot of value out of that, but from a social media point of view, I'm probably still a little bit stuck in the past, if I'm honest.
There's nothing wrong with that, to be honest. I think reading books is far more engaging sometimes. Thanks again, Sally. Really appreciate it, and all the best of luck for your new venture.
Thank you.
Very exciting, and we'll definitely have you on again at some point in the future.
Brilliant. Thanks very much.
And thank you very much for watching. And if you could just hit the subscribe button, click the little bell icon so you don't miss any episodes in the future. And we'll see you next time. Thank you.